I wasn't supposed to overhear it, but I did. It was just another ordinary night at my in-laws. Same old predictable evening, everyone pretending like we were a perfect family, smiling through boredom. I had left the kitchen and was heading back toward the living room when my wife's voice caught my ear. She was speaking softly, clearly convinced no one could overhear her. But I did. "He's pathetic in bed, Mom. Honestly, I have to fake it every time." Then came laughter, my mother-in-law's laughter, sharp and familiar, like they shared some private joke at my expense. It wasn't just laughter, though. There was a cruelty in it, a mocking edge that twisted my stomach. I froze mid-step, my mind racing to understand what I just heard. Everything around me seemed to blur, the usual household noise fading beneath the weight of her words. I tightened my fingers around the cold glass of water I was holding, afraid to breathe too loudly, worried they'd discover me lurking right outside the room. Part of me wanted to confront them right then, but something deeper held me back. This wasn't a moment that could be solved with a quick argument. This felt bigger, heavier, one of those moments that change your life permanently. I listened quietly as my mother-in-law replied dismissively, "Sweetheart, that's just men for you," as if I were some tedious burden her daughter had to bear. "At least he's useful in other ways, right?" she added, laughing again, sending another wave of nausea through me. I'd never given much thought to my relationship with my mother-in-law before. Sure, she had always been somewhat distant, a little judgmental, but I'd assumed that was just who she was. I used to tell myself it didn't matter because I wasn't married to her. But now, standing silently, hearing them casually ridicule me like I wasn't worth anything, the reality was painfully obvious. This wasn't just some careless joke or accidental remark. It was exactly how they saw me, less than. In that instant, something changed inside me, a clear understanding that my marriage, the relationship I'd invested so much in, meant something entirely different to her, to both of them. Slowly, I backed away and quietly slipped into the bathroom, locking the door behind me and setting the glass of water down on the sink. I stared at myself in the mirror, expressionless, but my mind spinning. How long had she felt this way? Had it always been like this? Memories rushed back, the little comments I'd brushed off, nights she turned away from me without explanation, her occasional impatience, and those subtle eye rolls when I'd make a move. I always blamed stress, tiredness, the usual stuff people deal with. But now I wondered if she'd ever truly wanted me at all, or if I'd been kidding myself all along. Pathetic. That word stuck with me more than anything else she'd said. But I wasn't hurt the way you'd expect. This was different. Slow-building anger mixed with sudden clarity. I wasn't devastated or even crushed. I was just finished. I breathed deeply, forcing calm. No need to rush out or make a scene, not yet, because this wasn't about one cruel moment. It was about everything. For the first time in years, I wasn't desperately trying to patch things up. Instead, I saw clearly what our marriage truly was, and I knew things were about to change. I walked out of the bathroom as if nothing had happened. Not because everything was fine, far from it, but because I needed time to think, to really see things as they were. When I entered the living room, my wife and her mom were still there, sipping wine, laughing at something new, as if their little joke about me never took place. But now I viewed them differently. I sat down across from them in my usual spot, but this time I wasn't just passively existing in the room. I was observing. My wife briefly glanced my way, expression blank, then quickly returned her attention to her mom. She didn't seem worried or guilty in the slightest. That's what stung most. No nervous glances, no fear I'd overheard, because in her mind I wasn't capable of noticing. I watched them talk, their voices becoming background noise as I noticed things I'd overlooked for years. The subtle ways her mother always put me down, how my wife would nod or laugh, agreeing with her insults, treating me as though I wasn't even present. I wasn't angry the way I'd thought I would be. No clenched fists, no yelling, just quiet recognition settling deeply inside me. She had never respected me. The drive home was silent. My wife scrolled casually through her phone, occasionally chuckling at something amusing, completely indifferent to the person sitting next to her. And suddenly I understood what that silence really meant. It wasn't peace, it wasn't ease or familiarity. It was simply that she didn't care. She didn't look my way, didn't check if I was bothered or upset. And right then, I knew exactly where we stood. At home, she walked straight to our bedroom, switched into her oversized shirt, and settled comfortably in bed, scrolling through her phone. She'd done it countless times. Tonight, though, I wasn't just seeing it, I was actually realizing what it meant. I sat down quietly on the bed and watched her. I didn't feel angry, and I didn't feel affection, just clarity. I asked casually, "Did you enjoy tonight?" She didn't even glance up fully. "Yeah, it was nice." Nice. I nodded slowly, looking down at my hands for a second. Then I asked something entirely new for me, something simple, yet suddenly so heavy it felt strange leaving my mouth. "Do you respect me?" That got her to stop. Her fingers froze mid-swipe, and she looked at me, not alarmed or worried, just puzzled, as if I'd spoken in another language. She laughed briefly, a drone empty sound. "What? Why would you even ask that?" "I'm serious." Her expression tightened slightly. "Of course I respect you." But there was nothing behind those words, no sincerity, just something said out of reflex, casually dismissing the idea. I didn't push it further. I didn't need to. She returned to scrolling, completely uninterested in why I'd even asked. She didn't try to reassure me or dig deeper, just let it fade like it never happened. I stayed awake most of that night. It wasn't anger keeping me awake, it was my thoughts, already sorting through what to do next. I'd spent years trying to be good enough, trying to build a marriage that mattered. But I finally understood you can't make someone appreciate you. After all this time, I was finished trying. I woke up the next morning before her. I sat quietly at the bed's edge, staring blankly at the floor, listening to the steady spin of the ceiling fan. My head wasn't foggy or sleepy like usual. Instead, I felt sharply alert, fully awake in a way I hadn't in ages. Glancing back at my wife, I noticed how peacefully she slept, completely unaware that everything had shifted overnight. I stood, made my way silently to the bathroom, and closed the door behind me. At first, I left the lights off, just stood there in the dim grayish light, my feet pressing against the cold tiles. After a moment, I finally looked up into the mirror. It was the first time I'd really studied myself in years. Not just a passing glance, but an honest look. The tiredness in my eyes stood out first. The lack of life I'd convinced myself was normal. My shoulders seemed slightly hunched, my face blank of the energy I used to have. This wasn't who I'd always been. I used to have confidence. I used to walk with pride. I mattered, at least to myself. When had all of that disappeared? I braced myself against the sink, gripping the sides firmly while memories flooded back. Things I'd excused or brushed aside suddenly replayed vividly. How she always had to be the one to decide everything. Where we'd go for dinner, which vacations we took, who we spent our time with. The dismissive way she reacted whenever I talked about my passions, as if they weren't worth her attention. Gradually, I'd simply stop mentioning them altogether. I recalled how often I'd swallowed pride, apologized for things I didn't do, laughed off comments that hurt, and tolerated her mother's insults as just how she was. I let it slide when she mocked me in front of friends, pretending it didn't sting, even laughing along at my own expense to keep things calm. I'd always made excuses, stress, marriage, everyday life. But standing there, I realized it was never right. I leaned heavily on the sink, gripping it tight as frustration rose. I wasn't just angry with her anymore. I was angry at myself for letting it get this bad, for accepting that I deserved less. The night before replayed again in my mind, her quick dismissal of my question about respect, the way she'd brushed it aside like I'd said something absurd. But that small reaction revealed a much deeper truth. She didn't think highly enough of me to even worry about how I felt. This wasn't just about her laughter with her mom or one bad night. This was about me, who I'd become, and how little I'd respected myself. Was I willing to keep living a life where basic dignity felt like something I had to beg for? Absolutely not. I turned on the cold water and splashed it onto my face, grounding myself in the chill. It helped clear my mind, settling my thoughts. No more pretending. No more trying to convince myself everything was fine. I wasn't waiting another day for something that wasn't ever going to happen. I'd had enough. And that was when I decided it was time for her to experience what happened when I stopped trying. The moment I left the bathroom, I felt something shift. It wasn't dramatic enough for her to notice right away, but it ran deep, all the way to my core. I passed by her without a word. She was still wrapped in the covers, half awake, scrolling through her phone. I used to greet her every morning, used to bend down and kiss her on the forehead. Not today. And she didn't even bat an eye. I grabbed my keys and headed outside, sliding into my car without any clear destination. I just needed a moment for my thoughts to settle, to put everything in order before I made my next move. I refused to let emotion be my guide. No heated arguments, no pleading. That part of me was done. I'd spent too long hoping for something to shift on its own. This time, I would be the one making a change. That evening, when I finally came home, I kept my demeanor calm. I didn't act angry, but I wasn't really present either. She was in the kitchen, on the phone with her mom, laughing in that easy, carefree way that told me she had no clue how much had already changed. I took a water from the fridge and paused long enough to hear, "No, he hasn't said a thing. Same as always. You know how he is." There was so much certainty in her voice, as though she believed she could predict my every response, or lack thereof. I could practically feel her mother's smugness through the line. Men are simple, sweetheart. Keep their routine steady, and they won't question a thing. I stayed perfectly still, not making a sound, then turned and walked away, because that would be the last time she believed she had me figured out. In the following days, I did something new. I stopped playing along. I didn't text her during the day, no little check-ins, no "how's it going" messages, nothing. I began coming home later, offering no explanations, no cover stories, just arriving whenever I chose. And when she asked where I'd been, I kept it short. Out. No anger, no coldness, just distance. She wasn't prepared for that. She was used to controlling the narrative. Always knowing the details of my day, confident that I'd be there, predictable. But now she found herself facing a version of me she didn't recognize. I noticed her studying me more, trying to read the situation, as if I were a puzzle she'd never seen before. She finally asked one evening, "Are you okay?" I met her eyes and really took in that worried, uncertain expression. It felt good to let her wonder for a change. "I'm fine," I said, my voice level, then let the silence speak for itself. Soon the cracks began to appear. She dropped little remarks. "You've been quieter than usual," or "you're acting strange," but I just shrugged. That absence of response, that indifference was powerful. And for the first time in our entire relationship, I was the one holding that power. She tried calling me throughout the day, even leaving notes around the house, something she hadn't done in years. One night, she made my favorite meal and set the table like we were newly married. I took a bite, nodded, and said, "It's good." Nothing more. She knew something was off. She wasn't stupid, manipulative, self-serving, dismissive, sure, but not stupid. She sensed the difference in me. I wasn't chasing her anymore, wasn't asking about her day, wasn't trying to mend the gaps that had opened up between us. And that realization shook her, because suddenly she wasn't the one in control. It all came to a head one night while she was on the couch, scrolling through her phone, but paying more attention to me than the screen. She acted like she didn't care, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. She was waiting for me to step in and smooth things over like I always had. I sat across from her, let a moment pass, and spoke calmly. "I heard you." She blinked. "What?" I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. "That night at your mom's place, I heard what you said." I saw the color drain from her face for just a second, enough to catch her panic before she forced out a nervous laugh. "What are you talking about?" I didn't bother repeating myself. There was no need. Her grip on the phone tightened, and for once, she had no idea what to say. "Look, if you misheard something," she began, but I cut her off calmly. I didn't mishear anything. I caught every word. My tone stayed level, free of anger or bitterness, just a plain statement of truth. "You said I'm a joke in bed. You told your mom you fake it every time. And I distinctly remember you laughing. Both of you. So please tell me exactly what part I misunderstood." She froze, her mouth slightly open, clearly not expecting me to stand my ground. "You," she tried, then let out a sharp breath and shook her head. "Are you really this upset over some dumb girl talk?" It wasn't even serious. I nearly laughed at that. "Not serious? Huh." I gave a slow nod, like I was filing her words away. She frowned, crossing her arms. "What's that supposed to mean?" Leaning back, I stretched my legs out and looked at her. "It means I finally get it." Her stance went defensive. "Oh yeah? Care to explain?" I locked eyes with her, completely calm. "It means I'm done." She blinked, as if I'd spoken another language. "Done with what?" Her voice sounded smaller than before. I made a vague gesture between us. "This, us, whatever label you want to give it." She gave a forced, almost mocking laugh. "You're being ridiculous." "Am I?" I tilted my head slightly. "Because I've spent years ignoring how you really see me. I excused everything, even convinced myself that your lack of interest was normal in marriage. But it's not. Real marriage is based on respect, and you've never shown me any." She swallowed, her nerves showing. "That's not true." "Oh, then why didn't you show an ounce of guilt When you said those things, why did you laugh with your mother about me like it was nothing? Her mouth opened and shut again, with no words coming out. I stood, stretching a little, feeling lighter than I had in ages. I don't hate you, I said honestly, but I also don't love you the way a husband should. And I can't love someone who has no respect for me. Her breathing sped up. Wait! Without pausing, I pulled out my phone and set it on the table, showing her an email thread, a new lease, already signed. Her eyes widened. You planned this? I nodded. Quite some time ago. And that's when I saw real fear in her face. She'd lived so long believing she held all the power that she could say anything and I'd just keep coming back. Now I was the one leaving, and she was the one scrambling to keep up. Are you serious? Her voice shook. Completely. She stared at me with dawning realization. You don't love me anymore. It came out like a statement, not a question. I shook my head. No, I don't. I'd never seen her look so small, and not in a way that made me pity her. She didn't even cry. Maybe I'd expected some performance, but she just sat there, stunned, finally grasping that I meant every word. This wasn't one of our usual fights where I'd walk off, sulk a while, and then give in. I was already gone. I grabbed my phone, slipped it back in my pocket, and headed for the bedroom. I felt her gaze on me, but she stayed silent, even as I picked up the bag I'd packed days earlier and took my keys. I paused at the door and turned. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen, like someone who always believed she was in control, only to realize far too late that she wasn't. I hope you find whatever it is you really want, I said quietly, and I meant it. She had no reply, so I stepped out, and just like that, it was done. Driving away from a life you once thought was forever feels strangely unreal. I wasn't angry or sad. I just felt light. For the first time in years, I wasn't weighed down by trying to prove myself to someone who never bothered to see my worth. I wasn't going to justify my existence anymore, wondering if I measured up. I didn't have to try. That feeling was freedom. My new place was nothing fancy, just a small one-bedroom, barely furnished. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt something I hadn't known in a long time. Peace, no undercurrent of tension, no silent judgment, no more tiptoeing around, no second-guessing every word or move, no constant worry that I'm doing something wrong, just silence and freedom. On that first night, I settled into my new couch with a beer, watching the city lights flicker outside the window. I spent a long time thinking about it all, how much time I'd wasted, how many years I'd been shrinking myself just to fit into a life that wasn't really meant for me. Then I stopped overthinking, because the past no longer mattered. What mattered was what lay ahead.